Someone poured concrete into my great-grandfather's spring while I was at the hardware store. When I got back, there was a padlocked steel lid bolted to the stone, and 3 HOA volunteers in neon vests were posing for a photo in front of it. One of them smiled at me and said, "You're welcome." People ask why I didn't lose it right then. Truth is, I saw it coming a mile away. I moved here 2 years ago after my uncle passed. House was a mess, roof sagged, porch leaned like it had opinions. But beneath the mess was stone, literally. The old limestone ridge ran right through the property, and built into it, halfway down the slope, was a hand-cut granite spring. My great-grandfather dug in 1870. He called it the mouth of the mountain. That spring used to feed the whole valley. My uncle told me stories of people lining up during droughts with buckets, even in the 60s. Over the decades, most folks forgot about it. HOA put in fancy water mains, pipes, permits, pressure gauges, no soul. But the spring never dried. It just kept bubbling under the surface like it was waiting for someone to remember. So I did. I spent 18 months restoring it. No crew, no machinery, just me, hand tools, limestone dust in my lungs, and one stubborn, beautiful piece of family history. It was supposed to be simple: fix it up, leave it open to the neighborhood like my uncle used to. Quiet gift, quiet life. But quiet doesn't sit right with people who think they were born to manage others. It started with a little orange flag on a wire stake, stuck right at the edge of my property line like a warning shot. I spotted it coming back from the hardware store, just flapping there in the breeze next to the gravel path that led down to the spring. At first, I thought it was for utilities, but there was no gas line there, no sewer, no electrical work, just rock and water and grass. Next day, there were 3 more, a neat little triangle surrounding the spring head. Then came the notice. HOA envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I could smell the perfume of bureaucracy through the paper. Inside was a 2-page letter on thick ivory stock with the HOA crest embossed in gold like they were running a damn private college. Unpermitted structural excavation, violation number 401B. Your lot has been observed undergoing unauthorized alterations inconsistent with approved site plans. Immediate cessation and remediation are required. Fine. $250. They called my family's spring a structural excavation, like I'd just dynamited a trench across the cul-de-sac. I walked over to the HOA office the next morning, barely a mile up the hill. It used to be the old Ellenshire library. Now it had laminate floors, a Keurig bar, and a front desk staffed by 2 women who looked like their names were probably Diane, regardless of what their name tags said. "I'm here to talk about a violation notice," I said. I kept it level. I'm not the yelling type. One of the Dianes paged upstairs. 2 minutes later, Linda Vassell came floating down the staircase in a beige suit that probably had a name like Oatmeal Mist on the catalog. She looked exactly how she talked. Professionally moisturized, expensive, and absolutely sure she was the smartest person in any room she entered. "Ah, Mr. Harlan," she said without offering a hand. "We've been expecting you." I handed her the violation letter. "I'm restoring a spring. Been here since 1870, marked on maps going back almost as far. My great-grandfather built it." She smiled politely like I'd just told her I believed in Bigfoot. "We don't regulate belief, Mr. Harlan. We regulate visible alterations. That means your water feature needs to be brought into compliance." "It's not a water feature, it's a spring, a functioning one. You'd know that if you walked 30 feet and listened." She raised an eyebrow like she was too dignified to be corrected. "And that's precisely the concern. You've introduced a non-compliant water source into the hydrological system of the neighborhood." "I've done what now?" "You've connected a previously dormant subterranean source to open surface flow, which, according to our environmental impact review, introduces risk factors. You made that sentence up while driving here this morning." Her smile twitched for a half second, then reset. "The board has agreed that the spring constitutes a hazard until properly evaluated by a licensed contractor and accompanied by a Class C hydrological safety report." "I built it by hand. No pumps, no pressure. It's gravity-fed groundwater." "Exactly," she said, like that proved her point. "And gravity causes runoff, erosion, pooling. These are serious issues." "You mean like nature?" "Mr. Harlan," she said, leaning forward just slightly, "we are trying to foster an environment of uniformity. If every homeowner took it upon themselves to restore ancient infrastructure without guidance, this community would descend into chaos." "I think it already has," I said. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't threaten her, I just looked her straight in the eyes while she scribbled something onto a post-it like she was writing my eulogy. That's when I realized this wasn't about the spring. Not really, it was about me not asking for permission. and Linda Vassell doesn't like when people don't ask. I came back from a supply run 2 days later and found caution tape strung around my property like a crime scene. Bright yellow plastic wrapped around my fence posts, the oak tree, even the mailbox, like some kind of budget Halloween decoration. A laminated sign hung crooked on my front gate. Notice of temporary site restriction, pending review of unauthorized water infrastructure. They'd taped one to the side of the spring too, right onto the stone, adhesive bleeding into a 100-year-old slab like graffiti on a gravestone. I called the number on the sign, got voicemail. The message didn't even mention the HOA, just a robotic voice telling me to leave a message for Property Compliance Enforcement Division B. Division B of what? HOA Fantasy Camp? I left exactly 0 messages. Instead, I went down to the spring to check the flow. That's when I noticed something else. Someone had jammed a piece of plywood into the intake basin. Not screwed in, not sealed, just wedged it in there like a cork in a bottle. The flow was backing up, collecting in a muddy pool, flooding out the trail I just cleared last week. They were sabotaging the damn thing. Sloppy, passive-aggressive sabotage, but sabotage all the same. I yanked it out and tossed it onto the path. Water rushed through like it had been holding its breath. Next morning, new notice. This time, it was stapled to my front door like some medieval edict nailed to the chapel. Second notice, non-compliant water redirection, fine, $500. Deadline to cure, 72 hours. And below that, scribbled in red ink, unauthorized tampering with safety measures will escalate enforcement. I didn't even know what that meant. What counts as enforcement for an HOA? A drone strike? I walked around the neighborhood that evening and noticed something else had changed. No one would look at me. Before, at least a few neighbors would wave. There was that couple on the corner, Harold and June, who used to stop by with muffins, and the high school kid who asked if he could paint the spring for his art class. Now? They crossed the street when they saw me coming, pulled their dogs tight, acted like I was leaking radiation. Linda had gotten to them. I heard the whisper campaign from Betty O'Brien, my one remaining ally. She'd been in the neighborhood since the 90s and knew exactly how these things went. They're saying you're building some kind of illegal irrigation system, she told me. Saw a thread on the Nextdoor app. People are convinced you're trying to reroute stormwater. Someone even said you had a chemical tank underground. My jaw actually dropped. It's a spring, Betty. It's made of rocks and gravity. She nodded like she believed me, but even she looked uneasy. That's not how people think anymore. If there's water, they expect someone to be in charge of it. Yeah, I am. It's mine. She patted my arm gently like I was the one being naive. Then came the real blow. The ledger. I kept a thick, spiral-bound notebook with every single measurement, photo, receipt, and repair detail from the restoration. Depth logs, water clarity readings, notes from the original drainage test, even a dam-pressed wildflower I found growing along the edge. Gone. I kept it in the old shed, locked up in a metal cabinet. One day it was there. The next, cabinet forced open, notebook missing, nothing else touched. They didn't want the tools. They wanted the record. A week later, a letter arrived by certified mail. HOA letterhead again. This time, the fine had jumped to $1,250 with language about ongoing violations of the Community Water Safety Doctrine. I don't even think that's a real thing. They just capitalized random words until it sounded official. The deadline? 4 days. Pay or face legal action. Possible injunction. Forced removal of all non-compliant infrastructure. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to stop me, they were trying to erase the spring, like it had never existed, and they were betting that I'd fold before it got ugly. Problem is, I don't fold. I dig in. Always have. I gave them every chance. I really did. First thing Monday, I filed a formal petition with the HOA's Dispute Resolution Committee. 20 pages, neatly organized, with attached photos, maps, historical surveys, and notarized documentation of the spring's original construction, courtesy of the Ellenshire Historical Society. I even printed it on nice paper. Not for them, for the principal. 3 days later, I got a one-sentence response. Your request has been reviewed and found non-actionable under current community standards. No meeting, no call, not even a fake apology. I tried the county next, drove to the registrar's office, sat in a plastic chair for 2 hours under flickering lights while some guy named Mitch explained between bites of his bagel that because the spring fell within HOA-governed land use zoning, the county doesn't like to get involved unless there's a health hazard. What about destroying a historic water source? I asked. He shrugged. Maybe try parks and rec? So I did, and guess what? They told me it wasn't under their jurisdiction because the spring wasn't part of any registered trail, park, or heritage site. The moment I said the letters HOA, the woman on the phone actually groaned out loud. I even called a lawyer, real estate guy named Langford, polite, expensive. His assistant referred to me as Mr. Highland in every email, which was almost charming until I got the bill for a preliminary review that consisted of a single bullet point. Your HOA's bylaws include enforcement clauses with teeth. Unless you can prove malicious intent or overreach beyond their governing documents, it's not worth pursuing litigation. I asked him if a 100-year-old spring being filled in with concrete by unlicensed volunteers counted as overreach. He said maybe if I had visual proof, time-stamped and corroborated by an expert witness in water infrastructure. Sure, let me just run outside and summon a certified spring whisperer. By the end of the week, I'd racked up a total of $2,000 in fines, and the last notice came with the words, "Enforcement phase begins June 1st," in bold red ink like they were launching a military operation. That same day, a man in a reflective vest showed up on my property. No knock, no hello, just wandered down to the spring, clipboard in hand, pacing out measurements. "Can I help you?" I asked from the porch. He looked up like I'd interrupted his nap. "Just here to inspect the site. HOA Water Safety Task Force." "Task Force?" I repeated. "What is this, the Avengers?" He didn't laugh, just snapped a photo and mumbled something about unsecured ingress. I tried one more thing. I walked to Linda Vassal's house, big white colonial with a stone lion statue out front like it was guarding the gates of heaven. I rang the bell. She answered like she already knew who it would be. "Mr. Harlan," she said flatly, "I'd like to talk. Just talk." She glanced back inside like she had a roast burning. Briefly. We stood on her porch, eye level now, no desk between us. I told her I'd spent nearly 2 years restoring something that mattered, not just to me, but to the history of the land. I told her I wasn't trying to sell water, charge people, install anything industrial, just keep something alive that had always been there. Her face didn't move an inch. When I finished, she let out a soft sigh. Then she said, "The issue isn't the water, Mr. Harlan, it's the precedent. If we allow one homeowner to bypass standards because of sentiment, we lose the foundation of order." "Foundation of order?" I said. "You buried it under 6 inches of quikrete." She didn't respond, just smoothed out her blouse and said, "You have until June 1st. After that, the HOA will proceed with remediation." And that was it. Conversation over. Not a single person in power wanted to listen. Not the county, not the HOA, not Linda. They all expected the same thing, that I'd get tired, cut my losses, and give up. Sell the place, walk away. They didn't realize something simple. I don't plant my feet unless I'm ready to hold the ground. And I had just found bedrock. I wasn't looking for a twist. I was looking for peace. But peace doesn't live in file cabinets, or at least not the ones at the Ellenshire Historical Society. I went down there one afternoon just to clear my head, figured I'd donate some of the old photos I'd scanned during the restoration. I had this one picture of my great-grandfather kneeling by the spring, shirt off, hands in the water, grinning like he'd just struck oil. The original was faded and curled at the edges, but the woman at the front desk lit up when I showed it to her. "Oh, I remember that spot," she said. "The community source. We used to teach field trips about it." "Community source?" I asked her to repeat that, and she pointed me toward the back archives room where a volunteer named Joe, with thick glasses and a way of whispering like we were in a cathedral, started pulling dusty binders off the shelf. 15 minutes later, he laid out a weathered folder labeled Ellenshire Water Easements, 1901 to 1984. Inside was a legal document signed in 1923, notarized and filed with the county, establishing my great-grandfather's spring as a public utility in perpetuity for the non-commercial benefit of Ellenshire residents and future generations. The language was clear as day. No governing body, private association, nor administrative entity shall restrict access to, obstruct, or repurpose the natural spring situated on Parcel 17B, insofar as said spring continues to provide potable groundwater. Parcel 17B, my parcel. It was a deeded easement, registered, legal, binding. And here's the part that really made my blood freeze. In 1987, a renewal was filed by the HOA itself. Linda Vassal's predecessor, a man named Frederick Kane, had signed an acknowledgement that the HOA recognized the spring as outside the scope of its regulatory authority. Then came the final nail. Joe pulled out a microfiche slide labeled HOA Project Proposals, 1998 to 2001. On it was a scanned document from 2001, a failed proposal to bottle and sell spring water from Parcel 17B. I read the whole thing in stunned silence. The HOA had once tried to commercialize my family's spring, to use it as a branded product called Ellensure Natural. The proposal was denied by the state due to ownership ambiguity and inviolable public use restrictions, as well as lack of consent from the landholder, my uncle, who apparently wrote a furious letter calling them Hydrological Carpetbaggers. And the best part? That letter was addressed to Linda Vassell. She'd been on the board since 2000. She knew the spring was protected, she knew it wasn't under her control. But she buried it. And when I started restoring it, she panicked, because my spring was more than just an eyesore to her. It was a time bomb. See, if the spring existed and was legally active, the HOA's newer water infrastructure, those fancy filtration systems and meters they'd charged every resident thousands of dollars to install, would be considered redundant. They'd overstepped, illegally charged residents for improvements on something they had no right to touch. And if anyone found out, lawsuits, refunds, maybe even criminal charges for misappropriation of funds. I sat there in the archives with Joe still whispering facts behind me and stared at the legal language on that 1923 document. Linda wasn't just covering her ass, she was covering a cover-up, and she'd gone to war with me because she knew the spring wasn't just a piece of history, it was evidence. I didn't sleep that night, didn't eat either, just sat at the kitchen table with the original easement document spread out in front of me, a pot of burnt coffee cooling beside them, and Linda Vassell's entire campaign unraveling like a cheap sweater. I kept going over one question in my head. Why didn't she destroy the records? Then it hit me. She couldn't. That 1987 renewal wasn't just a signature on a form. It had been submitted to the county registrar. Public record. Permanent. She could bully a neighborhood, fine people into foreclosure, lie about me to the board, but she couldn't rewrite the courthouse. So I leaned into what I do best. Details, systems, quiet persistence. Step 1. Lockdown proof. I had the photos, the deed copy, the failed bottling proposal, and the HOA's signed acknowledgement that they had no authority over the spring. I made 5 duplicates of everything. Digital, physical, cloud, encrypted flash drive. One set went into a waterproof container buried under the stone by the spring, just in case. Step 2. Find someone who still believes in facts. Turns out the Ellensure Historical Society had a lawyer, retired environmental rights attorney named Carmen Shaw. Gray ponytail, denim shirt, coffee breath, and a memory like a bear trap. I didn't have to say much, just showed her the 1923 deed and the concrete over the spring. She muttered, "Jesus Christ," then asked if she could keep a copy. Step 3, make it public. I reached out to a local freelance reporter named Drew Linwood. Young guy, maybe 25, with a camera that looked older than he was, and a tendency to ask the kind of questions that made people nervous. He'd written a piece 2 years back on HOA abuse in southern Maine, called it Suburban Thrones. It had teeth. I met him at the spring the next morning. He crouched down beside the pipe, still dripping despite the plywood they'd tried to wedge in again. "This was hand-laid?" he asked. 1870, no cement, just weight, friction, and gravity. He looked up at me like I'd told him I found Atlantis under the mulch beds. I gave him everything: the deeds, the failed water proposal, the photos of the poured concrete, the fines, the anonymous letters, the vanished ledger. Hell, even the clip of HOA volunteers measuring my property line like it was a nuclear site. He listened, he nodded, and then he asked a single question. "Can you prove Linda knew?" I opened the folder and handed him the 2001 letter from my uncle addressed directly to her, labeled RE: unauthorized commercial use of protected spring period. Drew whistled low. "She's done." "Not yet," I said, "not until the neighborhood knows." That was step 4, turn the story around. The HOA had been shaping the narrative for months. Ezra, the angry loner, the troublemaker, the one threatening community harmony. Now I had a counterstory. The HOA president illegally tampering with a protected public spring to cover up a decades-long misuse of funds. That's not drama, that's news. The final step was timing. I requested to speak at the next HOA General Assembly, June 10th. According to the bylaws, any resident can petition for 5 minutes on the floor. Linda couldn't block me without violating the charter, so she didn't. She smiled when I submitted the form, like she thought I was just going to come up there and beg for mercy one last time. But I wasn't coming to ask. I was coming to show. The countdown had started, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a rock. The kind they used to build springs. June 10th landed like a storm front. The HOA General Assembly was held in the Community Rec Center, a tan stucco building with acoustic tiles that made everyone sound like they were talking through a sock. Rows of plastic folding chairs, free lemonade, clipboards. You know the vibe, passive-aggressive church without the singing. I got there early and sat in the back, folder on my lap. Didn't say a word. Linda was already on stage, smiling like a weather anchor. She wore a navy blazer that probably cost more than my truck. She opened the meeting with a little speech about shared standards and protecting the integrity of our neighborhood from reckless, individualist behavior. No names, of course, she was too smooth for that. But everyone knew. When it was my turn, I walked up to the podium with the folder in one hand and a battered brass cup in the other, the same one my uncle used to drink from at the spring. He'd carved a little H on the bottom. The wood handle had a crack down the middle. I held it up without saying a word, then poured it into a clear pitcher I'd brought with me. Crystal clear water. From the spring. Just that morning. "Good evening," I said. "My name's Ezra Harlan. I own parcel 17B. A few people shifted in their seats. Some crossed their arms. I've been fined over $2,000 by this board. I've been labeled a violator, a hazard, and according to an anonymous post on Nextdoor, a water hoarder." A couple chuckles. Linda didn't laugh. "I'm here tonight because this," I lifted the pitcher, "it is not illegal. This spring has existed longer than any house in this room, longer than the HOA itself." Then I opened the folder, and I walked them through it, one by one. The 1923 easement deed. The 1987 reaffirmation by the HOA. The failed 2001 proposal to bottle the water. My uncle's cease and desist letter. The photos of poured concrete. The fines. The missing restoration logs. And finally, the legal language stating that no governing body, including this HOA, had the right to interfere with access. By the time I finished, you could have heard a pin drop. Then Drew stood up. "Yeah, Drew Linwood, the reporter. I didn't invite him. He came on his own, camera slung across his chest, press badge on his jacket. I guess someone had leaked the date. He introduced himself and said, loud enough for the whole room, 'I'll be publishing a story tomorrow about what's happened here. You may want to read it before the next vote.' Linda turned to the board like someone had just slapped her with a wet rag. "I'd like to respond," she said, voice still smooth but tight around the edges. She walked up to the podium and tried to spin it, said the board acted in good faith, said there were conflicting records and that any enforcement actions were meant to ensure safety during uncertain renovations. I didn't interrupt, I just waited. When she was done, I walked back up and placed one final document on the overhead projector. A notarized letter from the county registrar verifying the easement as valid and enforceable, dated 2 days prior, stamped, signed, sealed. Linda stepped back like she'd been hit with a taser. Then I looked out at the room. Some of you believed what you were told, that I was reckless, dangerous, a threat to your homes. I don't blame you for that. Fear makes people listen to the loudest voice. I paused. But you've all been paying dues to an HOA that knowingly suppressed a legal public water source. That fined me for protecting something that doesn't even belong to them. That poured concrete into a living spring to bury their mistake. I held up the brass cup again. This is all I wanted, to preserve what was already here, to share it, not control it. The room stayed quiet, but something shifted. People looked at me differently. Like maybe I wasn't the villain in their story anymore. By noon the next day, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. Drew's article dropped like a thunderclap. The water beneath, how one HOA tried to bury a historic spring and got caught. Front page of the Ellenshire Gazette online, with pictures. There was one of me standing at the spring with the brass cup, another of the concrete slab being removed. And then, the real kicker, a scanned image of the 2001 bottling proposal, complete with the HOA logo and Linda Vassal's signature in ink. It hit Nextdoor, Facebook, Reddit, probably someone's church bulletin. People who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly remembered how to wave. By sunset, 4 homeowners had requested emergency board meetings. 2 others filed formal ethics complaints against Linda for misuse of HOA funds and deliberate suppression of historical utility access. But it didn't really land until Thursday. That's when Channel 7 News showed up. I was hauling mulch in the back when I heard the knock, gentle, practiced, media knock. A woman in a blue blazer stood on my porch, cameraman behind her, windscreen mic in hand. "Mr. Harlan, I'm with Channel 7. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the spring and the HOA. I stared at her for a second, then nodded toward the gate. "Sure, you want the tour?" The piece aired that night during prime time. 6 minutes of crystal clear video of the spring flowing side by side with B-roll of the HOA concrete plug and screenshots from Drew's article. They showed Linda dodging questions outside the HOA office. "I have no comment at this time," she said, stepping into her car. "The situation is being resolved internally." Yeah, about that. That same evening, the board held a closed session vote, residents only. I wasn't there, didn't need to be. Betty O'Brien texted me from the meeting. "Unanimous. Linda's out. Water committee dissolved. They're calling it restorative restructuring." I laughed so hard I dropped my damn rake. Within a week, the HOA sent out a formal apology letter to the neighborhood, buried in legalese but basically admitting they'd overreached. Said they would be revisiting enforcement protocols and respecting historical land designations. Translation: they lost. Completely. Linda resigned for personal reasons. Last I heard, she was moving to Arizona to be closer to her sister, or maybe just to get as far from water as possible. The new interim president, some mild-mannered guy named Russell who wore orthopedic sandals and looked like he'd rather be building model trains, asked if I'd be willing to help draft a historical protection clause for the HOA charter. I said I'd think about it. He offered me a position on the board. I told him, hell no. The concrete's gone now. We pulled it out, chunk by chunk, me and a few neighbors who used to pretend they didn't see me at the mailbox. Turns out people get a lot friendlier when they realize you were never the problem, just the guy who wouldn't roll over. Took us a few days, but we did it right. No heavy machines, just sledgehammers, pry bars, and patient hands. The stone mouth of the spring finally breathed again. You could hear it, this soft, steady sound like the land letting out a sigh it had been holding for 20 years. I cleaned out the channel, rebuilt the overflow trench, and reset the capstone my great-grandfather had carved himself, sanded it smooth, ran my fingers along the initials he'd chiseled into the edge. EH 1870, now joined by mine, scratched in with a cold chisel underneath. Eho 2025. The water's running clear, cold enough to make your teeth hurt, sweet as rain. Some afternoons I sit out there on the bench I built from scrap wood, just listening. No HOA, volunteers measuring things. No clipboard patrols, no laminated threats, zip-tied defense posts. Just birds, wind, and the quiet hum of groundwater doing what it's always done. A few neighbors stop by now and then. Betty brings tea. Russell dropped off a handmade plaque that said Community Heritage Site, like he was trying to earn back a lifetime of HOA sins. I smiled, thanked him, and quietly nailed it to a tree near the path. Not because I needed the recognition, just felt right to mark the spot. People still ask me if I'm bitter. Truth is, not really. Linda tried to bury a spring and drowned herself instead. I didn't need revenge. I just needed water to flow where it was meant to. And it does. Still does. Probably always will.